Hello to all the followers of the channel. In this video, we will introduce you to one of the most mysterious creatures on Earth. Satanic and bloodthirsty creatures with different and organized races. Do not be scared. Vampires. They are immortal, blood-sucking demons of the night. They exist in every part of the city and in every part of the world. These creatures are said to be the spawns of the devil, for they have the power to manipulate your mind, seduce your spirit, and dominate your soul. They can, however, be killed by a wooden stake, holy water, and sunlight. But what makes them truly dangerous is their bloodlust, for they will stop at nothing to drain you dry until you're nothing but a lifeless husk. What's worse, is that they were once human, so by the time you realize, it will already be too late. Integra Helsing. A vampire is a nocturnal undead creature, typically held to be the reanimated corpses of human beings from the dark condition of vampirism. While any creature can be infected by vampirism, it usually spreads among humans. They are said to often possess having unnatural powers, heightened bodily functions, the ability to shape-shift their bodies, and are plagued by uncontrollable thirst for human blood in order to sustain them. Considered to be a blight of the world, they are recognized as the strongest type of the living dead, a subgroup of the creatures of the night, and are the only type of creatures that can fall to bloodlust. Overview. Vampires are mythical or folkloric creatures, typically held to be the reanimated corpses of human beings and said to subsist on human and/or animal blood, hematophagy, often having unnatural powers, heightened bodily functions, and/or the ability to physically transform. They are usually pale and gaunt with sharp fangs for puncturing the throats of their victims. Vampires are often described as having a variety of additional powers and character traits, being extremely variable in different traditions, and are a frequent subject of folklore, cinema, and contemporary fiction. In addition to being able to breed and control bats and insects, turning into a flock of bats, using them for reconnaissance and transform their body parts such as their arms into them as well. Uniquely, vampires have immortal bodies and are able to chance their appearance to their liking. Vampires are typically known to be walking corpses, thus, they are similar to that of malevolent spirits, which is why their reflections cannot be seen through mirrors nor do they cast any shadows. This increased level of vampire superstition in Europe led to what can only be called mass hysteria, and in some cases resulted in corpses actually being staked and people being accused of vampirism. All vampires are not alike, with some cultures have myths of non-human vampires, such as demons or animals like bats, dogs, and spiders. One difference are the runic vampires, which are created by the power of the Blue Moon rune. They are more resilient against normal vampire weaknesses, such as holy weapons. In most cases of vampirism, vampires are revenants of evil beings, suicide victims, or dark magic casters like witches and warlocks, but they can also be created by a malevolent spirit possessing a corpse or by being bitten by a vampire. Belief in such legends became so pervasive that in some areas it caused mass hysteria and even public executions of people believed to be vampires. Description. Believed to have originated from the reanimating corpses of restless souls of the dead, heretics of established religion, users of black magic, or even those that have sold their souls to be the incarnate of dark gods and devas, they are known to feast upon the blood of living beings, are endowed with dark powers, like superhuman physical prowess, shape-shifting, flight, teleportation, electrokinesis, pyrokinesis, and immortality. They are able to grant vampirism to others by feeding their own blood to their victims and can only be slain by sunlight, with anointed and holy items, or by destroying their hearts. In some stories, they also tended to make an inhuman hissing sound whenever agitated. Most current vampires trace their lineage to a distant common ancestor, the vampire god Absalom. They are ruled by the Vampire Council, a group of powerful vampires around the world known as the Greater Nobility that maintain them and the rest of the creatures of the night. Vampires are one of the greater creatures of the night, boasting high power and a grand amount of superhuman strength, which inhabit darker places such as Romania. They usually reveal themselves only at night and use the cover of darkness to attack their prey. They are extremely prideful, considering themselves to be nobility while strongly looking down upon humans as lesser beings and livestock. If a vampire wanted to turn someone, they would first bite them on the side of the neck and feed. The person that has been bitten would then have to be killed in 24 hours or the infection would wear off. If they are killed, they would awake 12 hours later in transition. Their 2 front teeth would fall out, then their fangs would grow in place of the teeth before. The person would have to feed on any blood to complete their transformation into a vampire. It is a painful experience because the bone structure changes and gets harder. The muscles become hard stronger. The nerves would die a little. This is all the powers and abilities start to come through, even the nails start to grow. Vampires have a very strong aversion to garlic and can be kept at bay by its presence. They drink blood, though they are apparently also able to eat other foods such as pasties. Some vampires cast no shadows, though most do. Some vampires are eternally bound to their coffins and the unholy earth where they were buried. Some vampires could not tolerate the smell of garlic and would not voluntarily enter an area with a strong odor of it. When a vampire dies, they start to burn and grow black lines appearing all over their body that burns their skin, and their veins will emit a black glow. This is called deterioration. After, they will be gray and their veins will stick out and the skin will be hard and rocky that will break easily, and after a couple of days parts of their skin will drop off into the dust. When a vampire is killed using a UV bullet, they will die the same, but their veins will emit a blue glow instead of black. Hierarchy. Vampires also gather together in broods. Broods are not very common as most vampires prefer to travel alone or in pairs, but a few exist stably over long periods of time, even rising to prominence. A brood of vampires is similar to a werewolf pack, and mostly act as a gang of sorts. As such, they are not affiliated with a specific vampire coven or clan and are generally treated as second-class citizens in vampiric society. Broods can have a large number of vampires on a similar scale to a coven, but given that broods are not tied to a specific vampire bloodline, they are separate from the more well-known coven. The more royal side of the vampiric society is known collectively as a coven. A vampire coven is capable of traveling together and help maintain one another's existence, and each coven is ruled by either a count or a countess. Counts/countesses are also vampires who claimed leadership over a domain, usually a single city or a town. However, only a very small number of covens do not wish to claim rulership over a city or state. Example being the Sinclair family, who despite having highly prominent status among the vampires in London, they hold no political ruling over the country but do have influence in regions where wayward vampires are not allowed to feast lest they meet a terrible fate. These covens are given the term anarchs, which are vampires who reject the status quo of vampiric society. Even so, they remain to be part of the ruling body of vampires due to their authority over lesser vampires. While they are still globalized, most vampires are generally confined to one city, which is ruled in a feudal fashion. In addition, as covens from different countries or states do not cross paths very often, the leaders of the said covens meet with one another to discuss important situations that concerns the vampire world, with the meeting being authorized by the elders, much like how a tribe of werewolves operate. Covens and tribes generally hold each other with great disdain, though contact from both vampire and werewolf is minimal, as vampires tend to reside in cities while werewolves are more suburban or outdoors. However, covens and tribes are willing to make negotiations in regards to claims of territories and the like. Appearances. Vampires are described as being impeccably beautiful in appearance, with bright crimson eyes that are said to be so alluring that those who gaze upon them can easily fall into a hypnotic trance. They do not age physically, instead becoming more statuesque as they age, developing very smooth, flawless, marble white skin. Their features are refined and perfected, including their voices, rendering them supernaturally beautiful to lure in prey. For vampires that feed on non-human blood sources such as animals, their eyes would instead being more of yellowish color. Being technically deceased, vampires can be noticed by their lack of body heat and heartbeat. They do not require oxygen, water, or human food. Human food is repulsive for most vampires, for their biology was not designed to digest the contents, only blood. However, their angelic appearance is a facade, for when vampires become overwhelmed with bloodlust and rage, their facial features assume that of a more humanoid bat-like face, and consequently increases their power. Some of them even possess wings of a succubus, like the Vaeternians. Whenever a vampire feeds, is angered or aroused, their red eyes start to shine and the center becomes completely black. Their canine teeth will lengthen into fangs, giving them a more predatory look that they often use to scare off or threaten others. Apart from their eyes and fangs, their physical appearance is like any other human. The only thing that can tell vampires apart from humans is a keen smell, because vampires smell different to humans as do werewolves and any other human-looking creature. With purebred vampires, their physical age is dependent on their gender and parents' age. If it is male, their physical age will grow into the age of their father and then stop, and same with females and their mothers. With half-bred vampires which are turned, their aging stops instantly. Inwardly, vampire bones are nearly unbreakable, and something exists within their bodies that allows them to produce a gas, similar to chloroform, capable of rendering people unconscious. Personality traits. Vampires behave differently according to the individual, but certain habits are shared by most. One of the most widespread of such habits is the tendency to sleep during the day, that comes with their nocturnal habits. Feeding behavior varies, and vampires claim victims in their own way, whether by attacking conscious people, silently feeding during their sleep. People they are fond of are taken away to their homes, and kept as both servants and food sources, being forced to take care of the vampire themselves. Vampires display a high sense of vanity and always try to look their best. Due to this, they are always dressed in fashionable clothing. Their personality is mainly a facade, and most are often shown to be rather cold and sadistic individuals, taking pleasure in the suffering and torment of others. However, this is not always the case, as some vampires, such as the Dhampirs, only wish to live in peace among mankind. Vampires recognize the difference in taste from creature to creature. An anonymous author states that orcs have a rich brothy blood, saying rats are a little sweet for the only meal of the night, and affirming that werewolves are a real treat, almost decadent, the tincture between human and beast. Vampires have a minor disagreement with vamp mosquitoes over their presumption to the vampire name, as they consider those buzzing insects entirely too gauche to be worthy of the term. Natural rivalry. Vampires have an ancient rivalry with werewolves, along with other such were-beasts, whom they consider to be their natural enemies, and have been at varying degrees of conflict with one another since both races came to be, with no known end in sight. It is unknown what triggered this conflict, but many believe that it has something to do with territory. One vampire states that livestock had grown scarce once the werewolves entered their lands, and thus robbed them of their nutrition. As this livestock are humans, and since the werewolves did not hunt humans to eat, they instead went after the humans' livestock, which would drive them out. Another reason for why this rivalry started is due to the fact that werewolf and other werebeasts' blood are actually poisonous to vampires. This is shown by vampires recoiling after even have a sip of a werewolf's blood. Also, it is completely impossible for a vampire to become a werewolf, or the other werebeasts, and it is extremely rare for a werewolf to become a vampire. It is noted that there are hybrids of werewolves and vampires, which means that there are likely unions of both rival species, though no one have found one yet. A werewolf-vampire hybrid is not the same with a werewolf becoming a vampire. Vampires can have antagonistic rivalries with other species of vampires, with one example being the Turok-Han, who are more akin to the animals of the vampire world and would not hesitate to attack and kill normal vampires. Other vampiric species can drive out foreign vampires when they encroach upon their territory or feeding grounds, which Blitz T. Abrams compares to the animal kingdom. Regardless of the cause behind this eternal conflict, Werewolves, or werbeasts in general, are genuinely not fond of vampires and see them as pests. Powers and abilities. Vampires are far superior to humans, displaying an array of supernatural powers, which are maintained by feeding on blood and make them stronger in many ways. Vampires possess increased strength, durability, speed and reflexes beyond the average. Vampires feed upon the blood of humans and with age and experience, gain increased strength and a variety of psychic powers, which could include telekinesis, flight, shape-shifting into mist, creatures of the night, and even the ability to heal fatal injuries from weaknesses that would normally kill other undead. Vampires also have heightened senses, to the extent that they can identify someone just by the scent of their blood. Humans who become vampires are often described as gaining an array of additional powers and traits that come after receiving the gift of undeath, though because of their lasting effects, many vampires consider this to be a curse. After becoming undead, vampires become immune to mundane human illnesses and the effects of aging, resistant to cold temperatures, and able to survive greater amounts of damage than a normal human. Being technically deceased, vampires can be noticed by their lack of body heat and heartbeat. They do not require oxygen or water, and human food becomes repulsive for most vampires. Many vampires could also dabble in magic, particularly the dark arts in their case. Using their magical abilities, they are capable of performing a variety of devastating attacks and conjure powerful defenses, making them quite the challenge for other powerful beasts and combatants such as werewolves and demons. The arguably most terrifying ability of vampires is what is known as the bloodlust, since they often can use this ability to turn into a more bestial or demonic form, much more powerful than their natural state, giving them an edge in battle and making them more difficult to slay. This ability is reserved for more experienced and advanced vampires, and the same can be said for the Crimson Claw, which is an ability exclusive for higher vampires like Shinso Vampire. Blood drain. Vampires suck out blood through someone's neck via their fangs. Vampires turn humans into vampires by doing so. Some vampires instead feeds off life energy or even extract the love from anyone who currently has it, though the latter is extremely rare. Immortality. Vampires are immortal, because they are already dead. If someone becomes a vampire, they stop aging. This, however, does not mean they cannot die, but only that they is not affected by the normal human trials and tribulations of getting older. Super strength. Vampires are far stronger than any average human or animal, so can overpower, fend off or kill them with ease. A vampire's strength is big. They can punch or kick at a very intense rate and can knock some people unconscious, knock them back and send them flying, or sometimes, if hard enough, kill a human or animal. They can lift their own body weight and can slay creatures far larger than themselves. Their strength also allows them to easily break stone and send people flying several feet. Their teeth are strong enough to bite through metal/steel as though it was bread, and their nails can gouge holes in stone. Even the weaker vampires are strong enough to lift a small car. Super speed. Known as flitting to some vampires, vampires are able to move very quickly, much faster than a human or animal can. No human or animal can outrun or run away from them. They can maneuver, react, and run at superhuman speeds that far exceeds humans. Their speed can range from being slightly faster than humans to becoming nothing more than a blur of motion, appearing to appear and disappear at random, making it so that no mortal can outrun, catch up to, or elude them. Vampires can combine their speed with their natural magic, granting them far more powerful levels of speed. Heightened senses. Vampires have extremely strong senses. They are able to hear in high-pitched frequencies, being able to hear conversations a normal human cannot, and know where others are sneaking around even miles away. Vampires also have a very keen sense of smell, along with the ability to see in total darkness. Because of these senses, it makes them almost impossible to ambush a vampire. One vampire mentions how she can feel the slightest air currents, how she can even see the tiniest pores, and how she can hear the water running through the pipes 3 stories up. When a vampire kisses someone, it is like their senses going on overdrive. Supersonic hearing. Some vampires can listen to sounds from a very long distance, and instantly recognize what they are, due to sensorial waves received through their ears, specialized to do so. Amplified taste. Taste is also amplified. Good things tend to taste better and bad things tend to taste foul. Dark powers. Due to being one of the greatest of the creatures of the night, vampires can manipulate darkness and shadows to various extents, which is most notable during the nighttime, which is also notably based off their mastery. Echolocation. Some vampires can project a powerful sound from their mouth that resembles that of a bat screeching that is powerful enough to destroy even layers of metal. Voice throwing. Vampires can also use this skill to project their voice to somewhere or something else, which to other people will seem as if the sound comes from some place aside from her, a distraction maneuver that comes in handy. Telepathy. Many vampires can communicate with others via their own minds. Also, if one another allows them full trust, one can find their friend by seeking them through their mind waves or thoughts to reveal their location. Hypnotism. Vampires instinctively know how to induce a trance-like state on weak-willed humans. When the trance is broken, the affected human is dazed, and doesn't remember the hypnotism, and only vaguely recall the events leading up to it. Some vampires can even force anyone, even other vampires, to feel romantically attracted towards him, even if consent isn't given. Body immobilization. Vampires can stop those in front from moving, even freezing them mid-air. Vampires usually do this with hand gestures, but it is not always necessary. Cold aura. Their presence creates a cold aura that can be felt by others several meters away, even while being inside a building. Mist. Vampires are able to summon and control mist, often using it to create barriers and search for enemies, with greater vampires being able to blanket an entire town, even turning themselves into mist to avoid attacks or escape. However, it was noted this mist isn't on the same level as other supernatural beings. Rapid healing factor. Due to being undead, vampires can heal and recover exceptionally fast. It is possible that this accelerated healing also grants the vampire a very high pain threshold. Their healing is powerful enough to allow them to recover from most lethal mortal wounds, which merely leaves them incapacitated for at most a day. However, they can get scars, and can still die from gunshots, mutilation, decapitation and piercing of the heart. This does not mean they are impervious to pain. Vampires can still feel pain, and when they break their bones, they need to reset them to help the healing process. It takes them up to 10 seconds to heal, though superior vampires can heal faster. They can't heal as fast when fighting or in a stressful situation. The healing can be accelerated if a vampire tries to heal while drinking blood or used as a healing medium. Disease immunity. Vampires are pretty much immune towards most illnesses and diseases due to their undead nature. A consequence of being a vampire is the immunity to drowsiness. As such, vampires are not hampered by fatigue caused by sleeplessness. Supernatural fighting skills. When a vampire is turned, they instantly gain the powers of fighting skills that don't need to learn. It's natural for a vampire. They can do flips, tricks and do a fighting style that no human can achieve. The fighting ability is mainly caused by their strength and speed. Invincibility. Vampires are nearly indestructible. Upon their transformation, they become immune to all conventional illness, disease, virus, and infection. However, they can still be poisoned with ivy, which causes severe weakness and an apparent fever. Although vampires cannot be killed by most conventional methods, direct sunlight, fire, or a wooden stake through the heart will suffice. Durability. Vampires have tougher skin and nearly unbreakable bones, allowing them to withstand the strength of another vampire without being injured. They can be hit with bricks, hit by something strong, thrown through something and still get back up and fight. It is quite hard to knock them out, but new vampires are easier to. Vampires do not run out of breath but can become exhausted in a fight, but that is because they are using muscle many times. They don't really need to breathe much, only to calm their muscles. Invisibility. Some vampires can render themselves unseen by the naked eye and become invisible in visible spectrum. They can move about an environment unseen by others and act without being observed. Memory erasure. Some vampires are able to erase the memories of others, ranging from a certain memory, or erase a person's entire memory/personality. According to a vampire scholar, it is a psychic art that requires a tremendous amount of focus and discipline. It is accomplished by putting his hands on both sides of the other person's head and pressing his fingers against the other's temples. It is described as a simple and quick process. Bat transformation. Most vampires can transform into bats at will. Each vampire has a different smoke color when transforming into a bat, like for example, Draculaura's is pink. Levitation. Some vampires are able to levitate at a small height. Adhesion. Vampires can walk or crawl on any surface. Some vampires can even hang from any ceiling no matter what material it is made of. Knockout gas. On command, some vampires' breath can be infused with a type of harmless anesthetic, like chloroform, that renders humans completely unconscious. Flight. Most vampires in their bat form can fly, though some have wings on their backs to help them fly. Weaknesses. Despite their superiority to humans, vampires do have weaknesses and limitations. Among stronger types of vampires, they are more resistant to some of these weaknesses. IV. When ingested, IV makes a vampire severely weak and feverish. Whether consumed directly, for example, through food or alcohol, or indirectly, for example, by feeding on a human who has ingested IV, the effects are the same. IV may also burn vampires when exposed to the skin. Wooden stake. A wooden stake through a vampire's heart is fatal. Upon which the vampire starts to deteriorate and their veins begin to glow a black light and burns the skin, turning the skin hard. If the vampire is unable to remove it after being staked, the skin will crack or break easily, with weaker vampires dying from it immediately. If a werewolf is holding a vampire while it is deteriorating, the black glow can burn the wolf's skin. Sunlight. Depending on the vampire's power, sunlight will do two types of negative effects. For stronger vampires such as Dracula himself, for a while, it would weaken them greatly, with their powers being weaker and losing the ability to transform. For weaker vampires, they would burn severely upon the sun's contact. The strongest vampires along with Dhampirs are no longer affected by sunlight, so can walk in its gaze without issues. UV light affect vampires the same way as natural sunlight does. Fire. A vampire if set on fire fully will burn to death, but it takes a while to burn than humans. Decapitation. If a vampire is decapitated, dismembering or manually removed, they will start to deteriorate quickly, resulting in instant and permanent death. If a vampire is caught in a headlock and getting their head ripped off, red lines appear from the neck up to the face and down from the neck to the body. A vampire or any other creature will have to use their entire strength to do this. Heart destruction. Destroying the heart by means of staking or through knives, for minimum 30 seconds at least, will result in permanent death. Heart extraction. If a vampire's heart is extracted, they will deteriorate quickly. However, it should be noted that some vampires can survive by creating another heart in their undeath body. Blood. While blood is required for a vampire to function, too much blood could prove disastrous for a vampire by either making them fall into bloodlust or exploded from the excess energy from the blood in them. Also, blood from beings that have smoked, taken drugs for a short period of time, or even become obese could prove harmful for a vampire. As noted before, vampires require blood, so possess a powerful thirst for it which no amount of other liquids could alleviate. If resisted, the vampire will experience severe discomfort whereby they eventually gave in to their instincts. When vampires don't consume blood for extended periods of time, they tend to give in to their instincts and attack the nearest human in order to quench their thirst. Newly turned vampires are the ones mostly affected by this problem, while older vampires learn to suppress it and feed on the minimal amount to survive. Magic. Magic can hurt a vampire, like the power to pop brain cells. It can hurt anything with a supernatural healing ability. It causes multiple brain aneurysms. Religious artifacts. Vampires are also weak against objects related to the church, such as crosses, holy water and crucifixes, which all can hurt a vampire. If a vampire comes in contact with any of these, it can burn them severely. They are also weak to powers and objects that are infused with holy power. It is noted that if a vampire was a holy man in life and was forcibly turned into a vampire, holy items affect and harm them less than other vampires, sometimes to be completely immune. UV bullets. UV bullets contain blue UV rays that are lethal to vampires, and if hit by one they deteriorate instantly and emit a blue glow instead of black. History. It is confirmed that vampires were a natural species that came into their own being, some believe due to death. However, they were quite different from the ones of the present. Originally, they were much weaker, disorganized and fewer in number compared to those of the present day. Some even didn't treat as actual vampires due to this. The vampire race began with purebloods who was believed to predate humanity. Their origin goes all the way back to at least Earth's creation. It wasn't until the vampire god and the sacred ancestor Absalom appeared and changed them all that they became the vampire known today. Myths and legends. Creatures from Slavic folk religions. Criminals, shamans, and abnormal dead are said to roam the world after dying. They suck on the blood or life energy of the living. The demonic compendium. The notion of vampirism has existed for millennia. Cultures such as the Mesopotamians, Hebrews, ancient Greeks, Manipuri and Romans had tales of demons and spirits which are considered precursors to modern vampires. Despite the occurrence of vampiric creatures in these ancient civilizations, the folklore for the undead species known today as the vampire originates almost exclusively from early 18th century southeastern Europe, when verbal traditions of many ethnic groups of the region were recorded and published. In European folklore, vampires were undead beings that often visited loved ones and caused mischief or deaths in the neighborhoods they inhabited while they were alive. In some folktales, vampires have to be invited into a house or public place like a school. Like succubi, they feed on the energy of humans, but they don't obtain it through sex like a succubus would, instead biting the neck with their fangs and obtaining it in that manner. They subsist by feeding on the vital force, generally in the form of blood, of the living. They possess extremely high fighting abilities, but they also have a ton of weaknesses. Under the sun's rays, their physical abilities are weakened to the degree of an ordinary human girl, and just from touching fresh water, a powerful numbing pleasure will course through their body. Additionally, they are weak to garlic, and just smelling it will diminish their reasoning abilities, and render them unable to think straight. Vampires have pointy ears, pale skin, fangs, and dress in Victorian fashion or uniforms. Vampires who drink human blood have red eyes, and vegetarian vampires have pink eyes. They lack a reflection and don't show up on film either, though there's an app that does get them to show up on film. Can't go anywhere uninvited, can't stand garlic, supposedly, it gives them pimples, sleep in coffins, can turn into bats, an ability they acquired during puberty, can command bats, and can't stand sunlight very well, requiring them to use sun cream factor 500, parasols, and the like. A trait unique is that vampires are almost always cold. It's possible much older vampires can develop much larger fangs and ears, since how vampires physically age is unknown. In the entry of the book Freaks and Monsters, A Hunter's Guide talks about how vampires are among the most feared and terrible of the undead, for they possess not only animal appetites but human intellect. It goes on to say how some hunters believe that vampires have infiltrated the highest echelons of power in human society, i.e. politicians, nobles, even kings potentially being vampires. This particular entry also discusses how slaying a vampire can be a hunter's greatest accomplishment. Origins. After Austria gained control of northern Serbia and Altenia with the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718, officials noted the local practice of exhuming bodies and killing vampires. Reports hereof, prepared between 1725 and 1732, received widespread publicity. Specifically, it was the Serbian word vampir, used for Arnold Paole, a purported vampire from the time period when Serbia was incorporated into the Austrian Empire, that made it into the West European languages. What the word ultimately means is unknown, though there are two theories. Almost all Slavic languages possess some variation of the word, such as Yupir, Wapirs, and Yupir. One theory thus states that the Slavic languages have adapted the word from a Turkic term for evil supernatural entity, commonly simplified as witch, which is the Tatar word Yubir. The word Yupir as a term for vampire is found for the first time in written form in 1047 in a letter to a Novgorodian prince referring to him as Yupir Lichi, wicked vampire. Another theory is that the Slavic variations come from the Slovak verb vrepit se, which means stick to or thrust into, which would make Yupir translatable as someone who thrusts or bites. Following the popularization of vampires in horror stories in the early 19th century, the word vampire has been adapted to represent two monster definitions. Primarily, vampire refers to the common Western idea of a blood-sucking undead with fangs and a dislike for sunlight. Secondarily, the word can be used to describe the collective of vampiric creatures abundantly present in the mythology of about every culture. In this sense, the word is a little arbitrarily applied. A vampire of this kind is not really required to drink blood, only to feed on something either the living or the pure possess, although there are also many creatures who do this, like zombies, who are not called vampires. Elder Scrolls. Vampires in another world trace their lineage to a distant common ancestor, an unwilling Nedic virgin called Lamy Bealfag, commonly referred to as Blood Matron Lamy Bal and Blood Matron, who was defiled by Molag Bal. With her, he spawned the race of monsters known as vampires, who then set upon nomads, spreading his corruption further. Other species of vampires are said to be the result of other pacts and bargains with Molag Bal, who promises immortality and power, but gives the afflicted an eternity of damnation. The Tribunal Temple's doctrine teaches a different version of the origin of vampires, but still sees Bal as their progenitor. In the legend, Molag Bal, called the Father of Monsters, spawned the first vampire upon the corpse of a defeated foe, whose nature varies by account. In some versions, the foe is a Daedra lord, in others a temple saint or a powerful beast. It is noted that such legend only appears in Morrowind's lore. Demonic origins. Vampires have been said to all be descended from the Turakan, the first and most ancient species of vampire in the world, of whom were also created by the demon Queen Lilith, thus vampires could be considered as a type of demon. From the Turakan, other ancient vampires were spawned such as the Rabasu, though in the latter's case they are more akin to vampiric spirits. The first ever modern vampire was none other than Judas Iscariot himself. From Judas, modern vampires inherited the typical weaknesses that would be used against them by hunters of old and new. These weaknesses being an aversion to sunlight, silver, and the Holy Cross. Vampires were said to have been created by Lilith as a perversion of both beast and man, a form of mockery towards the Almighty's creations, that being humanity. They would have the appearance of a human but the mentality of a beast and would pillage all that they come across. They were also said to be compensation for Lilith when her first children were killed by Sinoi, Sansonoi and Samanjalov. Main types of vampire. Damper, half-vampires. Ghoul, more undead vampires. Moroi, immortal vampires. Nosferatu, demonic vampires. Original vampire, progenitors of a brood. Shinso vampire, strongest type of vampires. Vampires by cultures. Ads, African vampiric shamans. Aluka, Hebrew vampires. Americana, American vampires. Aswang, Filipino vampires. Bayaban Sith, Scottish female vampires. Bruxa, Portuguese vampire witches. Draugr, Nordic vampire-like revenants. Impausa, Greek vampire succubus hybrids. Estries, Hebrew female vampires. Keijin, Japanese vampires. Jiangshi, Chinese vampires. Horten, Turkic vampires. Naxarar, Germanic vampires. Abayefo, West African vampires. Patasola, South African vampires. Pei, male Southern Indian vampire. Paimakiller, female Southern Indian vampire. Prikalisai, Romanian vampire werewolf goblin hybrids. Rabisu, Akkadian vampires. Sasabansum, Nigerian spindle-legged vampires. Sukuyant, Haitian vampires. Strigoi, Romanian vampires. Turakan, ancient Mesopotamian vampires. Yupper, Slavic vampires. Vampires from alternate realms. Draculonian, vampires native to Draculan. Vaeternian, vampires native to Vaeternus. Unknown vampires. Krasnik, holy vampires. Kudlak, unholy vampires. Necrarch, sorceress vampires. Vampanese, rogue vampires. Vampire bride, obedient female vampires. Vampire general, lawful vampires. Vamp mosquito, vampire insects. Vampire thrall. Vrikalakas. Vampire gods. Absalom, vampire god, patron of the night and those dwell within. Vampira, vampire goddess, patron of blood and life. Legendary vampires. Ambrogio, the first Greek vampire that fell in love with Selene. Dracula, vampire of God and current leader of the Order of the Dragon. Count Dracula, founder and true king of the Dracula faction. Carmilla, founder and true queen of the Carmilla faction and founder of the Crimson Court. Elizabeth Bathory, leader of the vampire Bathory House. Count Orlok, first Nosferatu. Dirge Du, infamous vengeful vampiress. Riri Yaka, Sri Lankan vampire. Consort Yu, ancient Chinese vampire. Abhartak, Celtic vampire dwarf. Hector van Neck, believed first vampire sired by the Turakan. Vampires, alongside werewolves, witches, and zombies, are one of the most famous supernatural races known to mankind, and possibly, even the most desirable. They are creatures of the night, known for their hunger for blood and affinity for bats, and possess beautiful allure to seduce their prey. Just quick mention, never ask a vampire if they sparkle unless you want a slow and brutal death, speaking straight from personal experience. Carl Black. Vampires are filthy creatures. Disease-ridden, you know. They stay off to the west, they'll indiscriminately pass on their curse together with a number of other afflictions. They don't do that here so much, but still you don't want to leave their wounds untreated. I take it you know something of the spells of restoration if one of us gets bit? A hunter. They say that vampires have no reflections, because they do not exist. If that is so, then tell me. What is that? A human before pointing at the vampire. Often mentioned in the folklore of various cultures, a monster that sucks the blood of humans and livestock. Possesses high battle capabilities and is not easy to kill. Its strength is one of the greatest among monsters. On the other hand, vampires have many weaknesses such as being weakened by rosaries and water. Also known as the Immortal Ones. Bite-sized Monster Dictionary. You have no idea how terrible it is to live a life like this. forever tormented by the night. Living eternally on the edge of life and death. Never getting any hope of salvation. Sure, after several centuries, you will start to be familiar with it, though not by much. You will forever live wanting and remembering a life you once had, the one you had traded away because of a boy you fancy, the one you will never get back. And to make things worse, some woman will have dreams about your life and used it to write a series of books that drags your name to the ground and shame you forevermore. That's the price I had to pay for immortality, for your father, for you. A nameless vampire. On the hot summer evenings like this one in L.A., Celeste often recalled the times when she was hunting Vikings, during a beautiful autumn near Paris. She missed that thrill, the smell of fear, and how they bravely fought for their lives. And Napoleonic times, oh, that was a feast. Of course, modern times had their pros, but the search for victims through Tinder has long lost its charm for her. Although, it was convenient. For today's meeting, she wore a white dress, which usually made them feel more confident and bold, losing vigilance. A simple trick. Celeste was in good mood and intrigued, at first. She even promised herself that if the conversation will be interesting enough, she would refrain from consuming, at least for this one evening. It was like that until she heard, "You have the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen." Nothing irritated her more than this banal sentence that he has had to listen to for hundreds of years. Really, really? During all these centuries it was really impossible to come up with something more interesting, more original way to start a conversation? She was bored. About Celeste the vampire. There are as many types of vampire as there are disease, some are virulent and deadly, and some just make you walk funny and avoid fruit. Evil creature that roams the night feeding on the blood of living beings. Cannot go out in the daylight. A wizarding description of a vampire. Vorador's pantry. A vampire's feast. Like cattle awaiting slaughter, men and women dangled from the rusted hooks upon the dungeon walls, blood and viscera frosted the dirt and stone. The abundance nearly overwhelmed me. For blood is the life, Cain. This place suits me, craven authorities and plentiful prey. A vampire. It's not even blood they want. It's life. A taste, any taste of what they once had. Most vampire lore is crap. A cross won't repel them. Sunlight won't kill them and neither will a stake to the heart. But the bloodlust, that part's true. They need fresh human blood to survive. They were once people, so you won't know it's a vampire until it's too late. A male hunter tells his children about vampires. A monster of legendary strength, that permanently infuses his own body with yokai. If they're pure-blooded, their combat abilities stretch well beyond imagination. They live apart from other creatures, either human or others monsters, for they're feared by everyone. Lady Oyakata. Blood to a vampire is like super fuel, and that's what gives the vampire that superpower. The nice thing about vampires is that if someone says, "No, that's not how vampires work," you can say, "Yes, it is," and then, nobody is right. Before folks swear off sunlight, they should know the basics, which would be easier if the rules didn't change in every film, book and TV show. A hunter. So what, mythically speaking, makes something a vampire? Well, it's less a rigid definition and more like a grab bag of traits you can stick together into an appropriately intimidating creature of the night. We own this night, just as we own the fear that runs in your veins. You may think your numbers protect you, but we shall feast upon your souls before the dawn. A vampire general. Awake, O dead, for there can be no rest for ye beneath the earth. Let the splintered bones burrow from the grave pall. Let cold fingers grip time-worn blades, and unseeing eyes survey the fields of slaughter. For your time has come once more. And the dead shall walk again. We vampires aren't a new race that suddenly came into being 10,000 years ago. Our origins go back far earlier to the time of Earth's creation, making our kind ancient in comparison to the human race. I don't know if it's because of that or for some other reason, but at that point in time 10 millennia ago, our species was already losing its vitality. Only the finest among us noticed it, myself and him. That is, the sacred ancestor. However, he and I took the possibilities of the nobility in different directions. He tried to create a fusion of human and noble, while I wished to mix our blood with that of aliens. My experiment had begun with their arrival. And for a while I was successful. Nobles injected with the alien blood I developed exhibited strength unimaginable in our kind. Devil Duke Gilzen. You are pierced because you're too concerned with your body, you fall apart because you're too concerned with form. Vampires are beings who transcend the line between life and death, beings that dwell between existence and non-existence, holy and evil, life and death. Return all things to the mist of chaos from which they originated, that is what it means to be a vampire. A vampire. Don't forget, like this video.